Here we are again in the very influential first two verses of Romans 12. Last week we considered Romans 12:1, which is a one-verse statement concerning the personal experience of being justified by faith, that is, presenting ourselves as a living sacrifice, serving others, and as an expression of divine love in our lives. And this week, we're considering Romans 12:2, another one-verse week, which is a one-verse statement concerning the purpose of sacrificial living. That is, to transform the world. Now that's over against conforming to the world. This is a power-packed statement that has had significant implications for the Christian movement for 2,000 years. Now we've got to understand the historical context. 60 AD. Paul was a Jew, well aware of the self-understanding of the Jewish community that they had conformed to the world, to the Roman world, specifically by date of 166 BC. This self-understanding was so clear that when the Jewish library was put together 30 years after Paul wrote his Christian message to the church at Rome, 30 years later, the Jewish library was put together at the Council of Jamnia, and the decision was made that no book written between 166 BC and 90 AD would be included in the Jewish library, because that was the period of time that they had been contaminated by conforming to the world. So Paul's statement in that historical context that we must not conform to the ways of the world, but rather live to transform the world, was vividly clear in 60 AD. Now, in my journey, the author has best unpacked Paul's message concerning the relationship of the Christian community to the world and to culture is Richard Niebuhr, who 75 years ago wrote the book Christ and Culture. Now, in this book, he explored 4 typical answers to the question, what's the relationship of Christ with culture? The first one he lifted up as a typical answer is that Christ is against culture. Then he explored Christ of culture, and then Christ above culture, and finally Christ and culture in paradox. Now, none of these typical answers pass the truth test of the revelation of divine love as revealed in Jesus Christ. So let's look at these very briefly. See, Christ against culture implies a separation, sort of a disengagement with culture that does not represent the life of Jesus at all. He was very engaged. Now, the Christ of culture implies a lack of tension between the teachings of Jesus and the ways of the world, which leads to a civil religion in which faith is finally defined by culture, not by Christ. This is what happened to the Jewish community from 166 on. They were a faith of the culture. contaminated by the ways of the Roman world. So Christ against culture doesn't meet the test. Christ of culture doesn't meet the test. Then how about Christ above culture? Christ above culture implies an understanding of the existence of the faithful sort of above and beyond the world, which prevents any possibility of temptation or contamination. That's not what Jesus lived and taught. Well, then how about Christ and culture and paradox? This implies a dualistic understanding that culture is ruled by the devil and the faith is ruled by God, the dualism that we find apparent in many avenues of thought in the Christian tradition. But that isn't what Jesus lived and taught, that there was a world ruled by the devil and a world ruled by God, and humanity was simply a chessboard in the battle between the devil and God. Now, Christ and culture and paradox doesn't match Jesus' teachings at all. But Niebuhr concludes his book with the fifth option. Christ is the transformer of culture. You see that? Right out of Romans 12:2. For to transform culture includes the element of hope that indeed the world can be transformed into an experience of divine love in the relationship of humanity with creation, humanity with each other. Remember the campfire stories in Genesis and the life and teachings of Jesus, both representing the understanding of Paul in this letter to Rome in Romans 12:2. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you might prove what is the will of God and what is good and acceptable and perfect. Now, this understanding of transformation is of particular importance to United Methodists. For in the General Conference of 1996, 25 years ago, the understanding that the purpose of the United Methodist Church was to make disciples of Jesus Christ, there was a phrase added to that in 1996, and that is to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. Now that's so significant, because that could have been for the personal salvation of individuals. But that's not what the General Conference of 96 said. For the transformation of the world. Now, I happen to believe, and I was there at the General Conference in 1996, and I watched it happen, but to me that was the first indication that the separation that we are about to experience in the United Methodist Church was signaled in 1996. For in 1996, the United Methodist Church clearly declared to all that the world of racism, the world of classism, the world of prejudice, the world of exclusion must be transformed by the divine love, which stresses acceptance, tolerance, inclusivity, and love for each other. Sort of reminds us of the great commandment that Jesus said, oh, I know the 10 are important, but I've got just one. And nothing will slip between the cracks of this one great commandment. That is to care for God, care for others as you care for yourself. And folks, that means that the world of racism, classism, prejudice, and exclusion must be confronted and transformed by the gift of divine love. And so I think as a result of 96, those who would prefer for the purpose of the church to be other than transforming found themselves more and more uncomfortable with some of the radical steps that the church has taken to be more accepting, more inclusive, more caring for all with no exceptions. So you see, the purpose of the church is the community of Jesus is conversion, not only of the individual, but also of the world, that the gift of divine love, justification by faith, being made right in order to do right, is for the purpose of conversion of the world, that the world might be transformed, that the human race might recognize and accept the gift of divine love, to care for each other, care for God, as we care for ourselves. Indeed, we see the importance of Romans 12, 1 and 2. I appeal to you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present yourselves as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, that you might prove what is the will of God, what is good, acceptable, and perfect. In these two verses, you have the heart of Paul's understanding of justification by faith, to be made right, to do right, for the purpose of transformation of the world. There's a lot to think about, but maybe these questions will help you on your way. First of all, the stated mission of Grace United Methodist Church is to serve the campus, community, and the world. How do we see ourselves seeking to transform the campus of Southwestern College, to transform the community of Winfield and the planet Earth? Secondly, which of the first four typical answers outlined by Niebuhr have you experienced in your own journey of faith? And finally, what are the most obvious contemporary illustrations of the contamination of the church by accepting the ways of our culture? Enjoy your own thoughts, and we'll look forward to conversation on Sunday. Thank you.